Good morning, Bardstown and Nelson County, and welcome to another edition of Bradford and Brooks. Jim Brooks here with my co-host, Margie Bradford. Good morning, Margie.
Good morning, Jim.
Well, we have a little overcast outside, but it's really a pleasant day outside.
Yes, it is. It is. And I tell you, my backyard just provides the perfect opportunity for a bunch of deer to come and gallop around in.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and they came up and ate my flowers. So
Oh,
all those flowers I've been watering all summer long, you know.
well, you saved them for the deer.
Evidently, they grazed in the backyard and then just calmly came up and had dessert.
Well, they must have come up through, I guess, down through Barton's,
Right.
up through that
yeah,
way.
right.
Wow.
There must be a bunch of them back there because I got them in my backyard all the time.
Wow. And you're right there on Cathedral Manor. So
Yes, I am.
It's kind of unusual to have them
Yeah.
that close to town.
Now
but
they haven't. Well, no. Over in Edgewood, you can see them strolling around leisurely in front yards.
Right. Well,
So,
I guess both those areas have quick exits into woods and
Right.
and out
Right.
off the beaten path. So I guess that provides some cover for the deer.
right. Well,
And besides, they can't find those pretty flowers out
that's
in the
right.
woods.
Well, they can't find them anymore at my house. They ate them all up.
Well, Margie, it's that time of year, and we're continuing our series of candidate interviews. We have the offices on the ballot in November, and so Margie and I will be bringing you interviews with those candidates between now and the November general election. And this morning we're joined in the studio by Mike Caperton. Mike Caperton is a current circuit judge.
Yes, sir.
In what district?
Laurel in Knox County would be the 27th. Circuit.
27th circuit judge, and he is a candidate in the nonpartisan race for the Kentucky Court of Appeals. And so anyway, we'd like to welcome Judge Caperton to Bradford and Brooks. Of course, you've been here before, Mike, but it's good to see you back.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back.
And those of you going around the courthouse may have seen the Caperton mobile, I guess you want to call it that. It's how would you describe your vehicle? Everybody knows when Mike's in town.
Well, I've found over the years that everyone reads the side of a black and white cruiser. So I bought a black and white cruiser and put Caperton Court of Appeals, and you have to assume that most people do in fact read that. I like to think I perform a public service on certain roads by slowing the traffic down
Well,
as
sure
I
you
go
do.
down.
Well, that is a good point.
Oh yeah, I can remember as a kid. Let's see, I think state police were using Ford LTDs, and or Galaxies or something. Anyway, you recognize those headlights down the road, and so it didn't matter what it was. If it was dark and they looked like the right brand of headlights, you backed off the accelerator a little bit just to be sure.
Yeah, I've noticed on the interstate, there's something about most vehicles, they just cannot pass a cruiser on the interstate.
Oh, you can't. You could be going 5 miles an hour and everybody be.
Nobody wants to pass that cruiser if they have to break the speed limit to do it anyway.
Well, I think most people were relieved when a law enforcement official is on the parkway or interstate and is doing a little better than the speed limit. It's like, well, at least they can at least do 70 and not feel guilty. But I've seen people slow down below the speed limit because of a cruiser that's doing less. So, anyway, well, Mike, you've got years of experience as a legal experience and as a circuit judge. Tell our listeners a little bit about your experience at the Court of Appeals and why you want to go back there.
Well, if I may, let's talk about the Court of Appeals and what it is and why it's important.
Right.
Now, in Kentucky, you have a tiered court system. You have district court, circuit court, Court of Appeals, and Supreme Court. Circuit court handles your matters of unlimited jurisdiction, whether they're going to be criminal, you would look at year to death, whether civil, sky's the limit. It's also the first appeal you get from circuit court as a matter of right. So it may be the only appeal you get on a case out of circuit court. because the Supreme Court will likely, on the general rule, will only hear those matters with its discretion. So if it denies it, you get the Court of Appeals
And that's it.
decision. That's it. So it's important when you sit at the Court of Appeals. Of course, I've been district judge, circuit judge. I served a term at the Court of Appeals. You clarify the case law as it applies to certain laws, statutes. You give guidance to the business community because you do interpretation of whether it be a contract or how regulations or statutes might apply to a business. Your domestic law, give guidance to your domestic judges as well as the attorneys that practice before those courts, because what you write is the law. Now, you have choices of either publishing it or not publishing it. If you publish it, it is the law. If you don't publish it, it's still citable, that opinion is, if there's no other opinion on point. So there's a rule by which you can go through that. So the importance of that court to just gentleman walking or lady walking down the street is it helps shape and clarify the law as it applies to their lives. And it may be constitutional rights, search and seizure, whatever it be, criminal, civil, domestic. Now, once you understand the tiered system and how that would operate, then you go to the decisions that it makes, and of course those are published. And insofar as my background, think of it this way: the more education and experience you have, hopefully the better decisions you make, because your decisions are based on education and experience. Well, you know, I started out as an attorney. I did complex civil litigation. I've done criminal litigation, whether misdemeanor or up in circuit court, your felonies, workers' comp law, because the Court of Appeals will hear workers' comp appeals from the workers' comp board. So you have to be versed in workers' comp law, or it should be, if you want to be well-rounded. After litigation for several years, then I ran for district judge. Well, your district judge, back in those days, that was before you had your domestic judges.
Right.
So your district judge does much of what your domestic judges do now. We did your dependency cases, your neglect, your abuse, your paternity, your child support, your domestic violence, all your misdemeanor, your juvenile crime, smaller civil matters, probates, traffics, DUIs. I served that for over 12 years, at which point I was successful and went to the Kentucky Court of Appeals. So I was able to do that job, sat there for a term. Then we spoke of me being currently a circuit judge. I left the Court of Appeals at the end of 14. In 16, I ran for circuit judge down home. Pretty tough campaign at that time. I think Governor Bevan came in the first of 15. Wasn't elected 14, come in the first of, elected 15, come in first of 16. He appointed my opponent, which usually a gubernatorial appointment is pretty stiff in an election. However, the people still put their faith and trust in me, and I won in the fall. So I'll have to, look at the people down there that best know me and their vote of trust and faith in my ability to elect me over top of the governor's appointment, as well as keep me elected all these years. But your breadth of education and experience, whether it be law or I was single parent, raised daughters. District court was a great place for me to do that because it allowed me to we had shorter cases. So you could take a break, you could take your daughters to school in the morning, take a break and pick them up in the afternoon and get them home. And I think that helps, being a single parent, get you more involved in family life because you are family. You are the family as a single parent. And it gave you more understanding as to the people that came through and your children and your domestics. and where all that might be. As far as why me, it's just based on education, experience as a judge, breadth of life experience. While at the Kentucky Court of Appeals, no one gives you a grade. You know, you don't
Right,
say, well,
right.
you're a grade 6 judge, you know, on a 1 to 10 scale. Probably the best that I could say is in 15, or in 14 actually, on my way departing the Court of Appeals and coming back home before running for circuit judge. My colleagues gave me an award, which I brought today, of devoted service to the Kentucky Court of Appeals. Now, if your colleagues give you an award for devoted service, you would have to think that you deserve that, the timeliness of your decisions, your ability as a judge, your ability to move the docket along, and your understanding of the law. There's a lot of reasons that go into that, and I'll be happy to get into some more in depth, but now I don't want to kill the questions because I don't know how many questions we've got.
Well, talk about the amount of counties you are having to cover here in running for election.
Well-
Are you able to get to all of those counties, and what are concerns that you hear from the people when you're talking to people in those counties?
Well, I'm able to get to those. I've been to every courthouse in 27 counties.
Okay.
And I take, I guess the norm for someone politicking will take them a card.
Yeah.
Well, we have Flowers Bakery down home, and I certainly want to support the local bakery, so I take them pastries and donuts, along with pens and cards. But, so I've been in all the counties. I politic all the counties. What you have to understand in a 27 county race, you cannot reach the depth of political activity that you would in a 2 or 3 county race.
Right.
Right.
So in my Laurel Knox race in 16 for circuit judge, I could reach a more in-depth level.
Right.
Well, at the Court of Appeals, you're running 27 counties in this district, probably geographically a sixth of the state.
Mhm.
So if you're going to leave home in London and come to Nelson County, you're probably looking at a little over 2-hour drive one way.
Yeah.
Right, right.
If you're going to leave Nelson County and go to Bell County, you're probably looking at a little over 3-hour drive
Yeah.
one way.
Yeah.
Now, one other thing you need to understand about the Court of Appeals, though, is you are elected. There's 7 appellate districts in Kentucky. You are elected from an appellate district. Each appellate district elects 2 Court of Appeals judges and 1 Supreme Court justice. So at the Court of Appeals, you have 14 judges. Well, on any panel to hear a case, you have 3 judges. But what that also does, by breaking it down to appellate district, it gives the opportunity for the people in Jefferson County to send 2 Court of Appeals judges
Mhm.
and 1 Supreme Court justice. It gives the opportunity for the people in the 3rd Appellate District of 27 counties to pick 2 appellate judges as well as a Supreme Court justice. So hopefully that's representative of the peoples of that district.
So they really try to do it by population.
It's divided by population, and there has been, thank you for bringing that up, there has been some discussion about redistricting.
Mhm.
So they'll shift, likely in the near future, they will shift some of those lines, and you'll lose, I think the eastern district of Kentucky probably is lacking in population, so there'll be a shift, and we may lose some of the eastern side and pick up western or go north.
Well, will they wait on the census to do that? Or do you
Well,
think they're going to
they're
just try to-
current, I think they're working off the current census, but I think if you're going to adjust as to population, you would certainly think that this get the newest census
Mhm.
Well,
or
that's
ones
what I would
coming up.
think.
Let's get the best one we can.
That's what
and,
I would think.
And if you have to wait a year to get it, just wait a year and get the
Yeah.
new census, because anytime you redistrict, you're going to lose, you're not going to be up to date totally, because somebody may have moved the day before. So it's going to be a shift, but you can minimize that by using the most updated census. But now, one thing, when you do sit at the Court of Appeals, there's 14 judges, you know, I as an appellate judge may hear cases out of Louisville or Ashland or Paducah, because you sit at the appellate level and your cases do not necessarily come from your district. They come from just statewide.
Do they try to mix it up to where they have judges outside the areas where the cases are from, or is it just kind of random how
It's
they're
random.
assigned?
It's a random assignment. And the panels are, actually, I think that, as I recall, the way the panels are put together, it's a predetermined, and it repeats every 7 years or something like that. Because if we three sat this month, then next month they would drop one off and substitute another judge. And that way, you as a judge get exposed to the ideas of another judge. Because when you form that panel, you know, I was going over the experience of civil litigation, complex civil, domestic, my background. You want 3 participatory judges in that decision, and you know what you know about criminal law, what you would know about criminal, me about criminal, what you know about domestic, what you know, to reach a better decision and application of the law.
Well, Mike, just curious, do the 3 judges talk to one another
Absolutely.
a good deal about a case when they're looking at it?
Absolutely. Some much more than others. Certainly you'll have some cases that are appealed. And what you're looking at on appeal is you're looking at the circuit judge. Now, you would elect a circuit judge from this area.
Right.
We would assume that that circuit judge reflects the values and the faith in the community. In his election, he got the most votes. So we look at, did he apply the correct law? If he did he apply it correctly to the facts? Decisions he made, was it within his discretion? And if he did make an error, well, did it have effect on the outcome of the case? Because if there's some errors that would have had no effect on the outcome of the case, and there'd be no use correcting it and sending it back. The only thing you're doing then is burden the judiciary at the circuit level and give them
Right.
another case.
Right.
Sometimes you vacate an opinion at the Court of Appeals, send it back to circuit court. Sometimes you just send it back with some direction and say you need to relook at this in light of this various law and make a decision. We didn't really, when I sat at the Court of Appeals, we didn't really tell them to make a different decision. We just told them, look at it in light of this, and the judges did, you know.
But you're only looking for errors in applying the law. You're not looking legal errors.
Yes.
You're not looking to say, well, they weren't fair or they didn't do a good job. You're not looking
Well,
at that.
at the Court of Appeals, we're fair and just on the basis of the application of the law to the facts. We don't decide the facts. We wouldn't change the facts. I keep saying we, I should say the Court of Appeals doesn't, because I'm not there and haven't been there for about 4 or 5 years. They don't adjust the facts. You get a cold record. So if it's got a half a banker's box, that's what you get. When I was at the Court of Appeals, some come in probably had 6 or 8 banker's boxes full of records. We would be assigned anywhere from 8 to 10 cases a month. And my policy always was, if I get 8 in, I need to get 8 out, because if you don't, then you're going to be getting behind. And you don't want to be behind. You got to keep your cases moving. Now, you might retain a case for a couple, 3 months to think about it, because how many times in whatever it is you do, you'll think about something, you'll lay it up, and you'll I have another thought. Wait a minute, let's look at it in light of this.
Right.
And then you may talk to Ms. Bradford, and you say, what do you think? And she gives you another idea and says, well, let's look at it in light of that. But back to the question of, do we converse? Yes. More complicated cases, converse more.
So each of
less.
you will get all of the information.
Everyone gets the briefs.
Yes.
Not everyone gets the files, the case file that comes from circuit court. First of all, because if you had to copy it that many times, I mean, it'd be voluminous. But the briefs which cite to it, now I would depend on either of you on the cases you got. You would get, if they're assigning 10 that month, you would get 10. Ms. Bradford gets 10, I get 10. I depend on you if you're looking at it and you say, well, now here's a cite in this brief, but that's not what that record says. So either the citation's bad or it's just not in the record at all. There's been times that we've had, that I had briefs drafted by attorneys and they didn't have enough citations. So you really send it back to them and say, you're going to have to put in citations, because if you don't, then I have to go through all those pages to see what you cited to. Now, if it's just a thin case file, couple of, or half a banker's box, well, that's one thing. But when it's 8 or 10 banker's boxes and you want me to review it and you didn't put any case cites in your brief and I've got to see if all that stuff is in there somewhere, wow, that can take some time. So you're probably going to get that brief back. And the rules call for citations, copious citations, so we don't have to look for that. But so there's conversation, and the more complex the case, the more conversation there will be.
All right, well, let's take a quick break for some commercials. You're listening to Bradford and Brooks and our very special guest, Circuit Judge Mike Caperton, a candidate for Kentucky Court of Appeals. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages. All right, you're back with WBRT, Bradford and Brooks. Jim Brooks here with Margie Bradford, and we're interviewing our very special studio guest today, Mr. Mike Caperton. Judge Caperton is a circuit judge from those counties again?
Laurel and Knox.
Laurel and Knox County, and is a candidate for Kentucky Court of Appeals in our district, and he will be on the November ballot. It's a nonpartisan race. So Judge, you've been busy going to political functions for both parties since the race began.
Yes, we get to double up as nonpartisan candidates, so we get to go to both of them. Of course, now this is not a county year where you don't have county elections.
Right.
So your political events are fewer.
Right.
Because once that primary is over with, most of your events, if you'll notice, are in the spring.
Right.
Yeah.
And once they select a candidate for the fall, there's fewer gatherings of which you might be able to politic.
Well, then you got county fairs and
You got county
judge
fairs.
picnics. And
I've certainly stood out at many a county fair. One thing I used to do at county fairs, this is a little probably can be amusing to some, I'd try to keep a trash can about 20 or 25 feet behind me. And I'd count my cards as I gave them out at the gate. And after about an hour, hour and a half, I'd go see how many hit the can. And if, that way I could determine if there was a 90% retention or 85% retention and what card you gave. And you would have to assume if they retained it longer than the trash can, they were probably going to keep that card. But that comes with experience,
Well, tell us a little bit about you're a candidate in this race. Why should our listeners consider giving you their vote? What do you bring to the table? I mean, we've been talking about your experience in district, circuit, and your term as on the Court of Appeals. But what really do you think? What do you bring to the table that people should vote for you?
Well, wow, that's a life question, isn't it? You have a understanding of family. Well, I was a single parent, so that gives you an in-depth understanding because you're not shifting many of those responsibilities.
Right.
And certainly in handling domestic matters or matters concerning children that may come up on appeal, you would like to have somebody that has experience and understanding of those, though you're applying the law. But then you do look to see if the judge, with the circuit judge or the family court judge, was within his discretion when he applied the law. Now, there may be things in your background as a single parent or your education and experience that you look at and say, no, we don't think that he was within his discretion when he made this decision.
So you bring a lot of different life experience to bear, as well as all your legal experience.
Oh yes, you have to, and the broader your life experience, the better, you know. I started out, I went to Transylvania University. Well, I wanted to get in medical school. I actually was unsuccessful at that. I got in dental school, so I went to dental school for a while and decided I didn't want to be a dentist. But that's some experience that you have, that you bring with you. I've worked for the Kentucky Department of Energy as a field rep. I was a mine inspector. I worked at toll systems. I've been a school teacher, had a chemistry biology certificate, worked with children, as well as teaching children and instruction and biology. All those experiences make you who you are today and combine, we hope, such that you'll make a better decision in what comes before you. Well, you take your life experiences and then you combine those with your legal education and your legal experiences, whether on the district court where you handled a myriad of things, whether it's misdemeanor or traffic or probate or domestic violence petitions and paternity, child custody, support issues, domestic neglect abuse. Then you take your prior Court of Appeals experience where basically you are at the Court of Appeals, which is the position I'm running back for now. So you've done that job, and do we think it was a good deal? Did you do well? Well, I did get a devoted service award. And then you take your circuit experience, which is where I am now, and you're handling, high dollar matters as well as year to death on your criminal penalties. But every decision everyone makes today is based on education and experience. Now, they may have an off day, sure. Something happens and they've got their mind somewhere else. Maybe they don't make the best decision that day. But everyone will make a decision based on their education and experience. And I think when you look at my breadth of my background in education, formal education, you're looking at college, UK law school, teaching certificate. You look at my activity with people, children. You look at my district court experience, which was really, as applies to Court of Appeals, is probably the most relevant aspect is your defense and neglect abuse and your paternity, your domestic violence orders, child custody, child support. You look at your circuit experience. Now, circuit. And I'll have to say, going to the Court of Appeals and coming back to circuit court makes you much more attuned, because what you get at the Court of Appeals, most often you get the hard decision. Now, when you said as a circuit judge, not every, or at least we hope that based on your experience, not every decision is the hard decision, right? You have some easy decisions. But when you said at the Court of Appeals, most of the things are the hard decision or are close to the line, or it wouldn't be appealed, right? They have to have some argument.
That's right.
Unless they just want to argue over a $1,500 piece of land and whether the line is on one side of the tree or the other, and they're trying to make a point. Now, we have had those cases. And then you work, you hear your workers' comp appeals. You've got case experience that exceeds 100,000 cases.
What do you see as the main issues that the court has to deal with? I mean, are there more of one type of case than other types of cases, and
Well, now
are
they
they more
shift.
complicated?
They shift. Probably the most emotional or heartfelt is going to be your domestic cases, certainly. Your most complex are going to be your complicated civil litigation and some issues that come up in that. Your criminal, my view is that if the jury heard the case and gave the penalty, that's the jury. It represents the conscience of the community. And unless they've stepped out of bounds, then that's, in all likelihood, the penalty you need. Because that jury has listened to the facts and reached a decision, provided they used the correct law, they were correctly charged by the judge, the instructions were clear and correct. I think there's an increasing number of domestic cases at the Court of Appeals, more so than when I was there. And of course, that really draws upon my, 14 years as a district judge, when I handled a balance, most of what the domestic judges handle now. So my domestic experience, if you took a judge from 2007 forward in our district, when the domestic judges came in as circuit judges, but if you looked at the district court, you wouldn't have near the domestic experience as would you prior to that.
Right.
Same way if you look at your counties up here. Who's going to have the domestic experience? Well, you don't have a family court judge, as I understand.
Right.
No,
So
we
your
don't.
district court will be handling a majority of that,
Right.
and your circuit court will be doing the divorce aspect and what child custody gets to them. Obviously, if it comes in domestic violence and abuse, in district court, they've already made some decision on child custody. What I used to do as a domestic judge, or as a district judge rather, and I used the family court, what's now the family court guidelines and visitation schedules. I remember, of course, I was divorced. Every once in a while you'd have someone, and they kind of, you would think they'd probably do best to have their children exchanged at dispatch. Well, some people kind of are indignant with that. They feel that that's a little beneath them. But when I told them that's where I got mine exchanged, that seemed like it just took the edge off of them right there. Which is a safe location.
Sure
I mean,
is. It is.
And you got witnesses on film.
Yeah, of course, one of the issues that I've heard talked about is the length of time, the excessive length of time that it takes for many of these cases involving children, domestic cases involving children. The length of time, an excessive length of time to arrive at a decision when these children are in limbo.
Well, now let me drop back just a bit. In district court, we sought to do permanency as best we could for the children. Now, certainly, a parent has an elevated right to raise their own children, absent a reason. At the Court of Appeals level, those are normally expedited cases, which means they go on top of the stack. As I recall, they did a sampling of my cases, and I would get to decision in less than 78 days. Now, that may seem like a long time. 78 days is pretty quick when you're looking at a record and going through it page by page.
Well, there aren't cases that take a couple of years.
There should not be. Let me say this,
All
okay?
right.
Because I can't speak for every judge at the Court of
Yeah.
Appeals, right?
Right.
And you may have isolated instances where a case lingers.
Right.
But as far as the average case, no, it doesn't. And if you're an attorney, and this would be great for the attorneys out there, but I think they all know it, if you think your case isn't proceeding, if you'll call the clerk at the Court of Appeals, they'll advise that panel that an attorney has called and inquired as to the status of his case, And maybe he's going to add a little something to it, and you say, okay, well, I've got 6 domestic cases. Let's go ahead and get that out because there's a pending situation which may need it resolved. But I would feel that every judge at the Court of Appeals gives those expedited treatment, and it would certainly be out of the ordinary if that was put down in the stack somewhere and buried. You ever lost a pencil before?
Every day.
Well, sometimes things get misplaced. Sometimes the computer doesn't print the last page. Maybe it contained 2 cases and you got the first 200 domestic, but the 201 and 202 was on the last page. But we always kept an aging, in my office, I always kept an aging document. Now that went through 2014. So that I knew what had been there and how long it had been there, and just get it out and move it through. Now understand that when you file an appeal, there's a procedure for that. So the circuit clerk has to get the record ready first.
Right.
Now that takes a period of time.
Sure.
Then you're going to, and you file your notice of appeal, and there'll be a counter statement of that. So there's a number of some time that it moves through before it gets to the judges. So if the attorneys are vigorously practicing their case and filing motions that go for a motion panel, that can slow it up. So it depends on what they've done. But I'd find it's extremely out of the ordinary if a case lingered for much of a period, I think over 2 or 3 months at the Court of Appeals, if it's a domestic case, at least once it gets to panel. Now, you may have cases it might take 6 months for it to get to a panel because you're doing your counter statements. And what attorney wants to come up and say, well, I don't want to file a brief on this. Why don't y'all go ahead and look at it? Well, you want your attorney to file a brief, and you want the attorney on the other side to file a brief, and you may want your attorney to file a reply. Because what we're interested in, when I was at the Court of Appeals, we're interested in, like an attorney told me once, instead of doing it quickly, I want you to get it right.
Yeah.
Because doing it quickly and having it go back down and relitigate and come up again, all you've done then is disturb what permanency those children may have had you have taken an extra 2 or 3 weeks and got it right the first time.
All right, we need to take a break, Mike.
Sure.
We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be back with more with our special guest, Mike Caperton. Judge Mike Caperton, candidate for the Kentucky Court of Appeals. We'll be right back. All right, Jay, you're back with
Can't reach
Bradford and
them all
Brooks,
straight.
Jim Brooks,
You
and
have to
Margie Bradford. We're
remind
back here with you
people
till the
about
top of the
that. You
hour.
have to look
Then
for
stay
it.
tuned for the best in local news and information here on WBRT. Just a reminder to our friends in Marion County, Springview Hospital is a sponsor of Bradford and Brooks, and we thank them for that. And let's see, we're down to about 5 minutes here with today's show. So we'll wrap up this segment with our very special studio guest, Judge Mike Caperton. He's a circuit judge in Laurel and Knox County. Got that right, family. And he's a candidate for the Court of Appeals, and that's a nonpartisan race. And I think when you get your ballot in November, Margie, I think you said it.
Yes.
Those nonpartisan races. Or?
Yes, when you get your ballot in November, you have to look for that because you will have the Republican ticket and a Democratic ticket, and then below that, toward the end of the end of the ballot or toward the end of the ballot, you'll have the nonpartisan races. And so it's easy to overlook it. People come in and just vote for their partisan candidate, but they don't think to look at the bottom and get the nonpartisan.
So when I vote straight ticket Republican, if I don't take an extra minute and vote for someone in Court of Appeals, there won't be my vote will not be cast.
Exactly right.
Okay. All right, well, that's good information to know.
And I'm not even going to talk about the straight ticket thing.
Well, we'll save that conversation for November.
Yeah, that's right.
'Cause we'll know how many people do from both parties.
True,
Right.
on a straight ticket. And I think really, and that does, they come in and vote a straight ticket. If you have candidates where they cross-vote some,
Mhm.
I think that probably gets them more interested in picking and choosing through your candidates.
Mhm.
And you have a little better chance of them dropping down to the
Right,
bottom.
it is, because they're in a they're in a choosing mode, so to speak, but, you're right, but so many people say, oh, I never really saw that, I didn't see
They
that,
didn't get
so
there.
there are always undervotes on those,
Right.
If I were
those
gonna,
offices.
if I were gonna leave a closing comment, I would say that, if the people in my district have kept me elected for over 20 years, then I must know the law, know my job, and have their faith and trust in me, or they would not have kept me elected.
Well, I think that says it all.
Yep.
Really does.
It's a summation of
Yeah.
all we've talked about today.
Right. Well, Mike, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to drive up here. Let's see, it's a pretty far piece,
So to speak.
from that way. But one thing about Nelson County, I found that I was a representative for a national organization. I was the Kentucky representative, and either far west or far east, I was about 3 hours and 45 minutes from either end of the state, so I could reach anywhere in Kentucky pretty much. So Bardstown was a good spot to be. If I was in Paducah trying to go to, Knox County or something, it'd been a pretty big haul. So anyway,
It
But we
certainly would.
but we thank you for taking time to come out.
Oh, listen, I appreciate it. Got out, and it is a beautiful day. I get to drive that cruiser down the road.
Now, how many miles are on that cruiser?
And scare people straight.
Well, it's straight. I think it's got about 100. I put about 22 on it, I think, so far. This race, it's hard to tell. Sometimes those get a little aged,
Yes.
and the odometer, you have to kind of smack the dash for it to really come up and light up.
That's one way of dealing with things, yes.
But it brought it up, and I kind of keep
Well,
how
it's
many
a-
miles I run.
I will say it's one of the more effective campaign vehicles I've seen in recent years. So.
Yeah.
Well, I always look at it, if you go somewhere and not seen, it's as if you weren't there at all.
Exactly. Exactly right. Well, Margie and I will continue our series of
Yes.
shows with interviews with candidates for a statewide office, and
Next week, we'll have Sherry Donahue, who is the Democratic candidate for state auditor.
That's right. And then we'll fill everybody in later on the other offices, but we will be reaching out to everyone between now and Election Day in November. So if you so keep listening, and we will be back on Wednesdays with more candidates and more talk with me and Margie and our analysis of Election Day whenever it comes in November.
Looking forward
Yeah,
for
that's right.
slicing and dicing.
That's right. Well, Margie, thank you for another good turn behind the microphones here at Bradford and Brooks. All right, that's going to do it this week. Everybody have a great week, and Margie and I will see you next Wednesday here on WBRT's Bradford and Brooks.